Hi everyone, I am going to give you my after it's all over reaction to the 3 nominees for Kennerspiel des Jahres 2020. I gave my preview of what game I thought should win, and if you've seen that video, you know my pick was The King's Dilemma. Now, I had some caveats with all 3 games, but for me, I was about 4 or 5 games into this legacy game, and I was kind of having the time of my life. I really get into story, and I really get into that kind of choose your own adventure style narrative. I mean, I read those books when I was growing up, and so for me, having a legacy game that you have to essentially pay for your choices and it shapes your future, that was just huge. It really was super, super compelling. Now, after I finished the entire game, the whole Legacy series, and I am on game 43 of The Crew, I'd like to give my reactions to these games, where I ranked them when I first played them, and where they rank now after having played them several times, sometimes dozens of times. I'd like to start off with the game that moved up the most, in my opinion, and that is Cartographers. The first time I played Cartographers, I would probably have ranked it a 6 out of 10. I found that it was problematic in a couple ways, and it just wasn't working with my brain. And the more I gave it a chance to kind of make sense and sink in, and the more I played it, the more I enjoyed it. I would rank Cartographers a 7.5 now. And so for me, that's a 1.5 upward momentum boost. And I think maybe it was just that learning curve for me. And I'm really, really happy that I gave Cartographers that 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th try and so forth. I wouldn't necessarily want to play Cartographers all the time. And for me, the replayability is there. But I think I've got to give it a little bit more time and then come back to it so I can kind of, enjoy it anew and kind of be refreshed by it, as opposed to having that kind of repetitive nature to the same base game. The next game that made some upward movement is The Crew. For me, the first couple times I played The Crew, I gave it like an 8. I felt like, yeah, The Crew is great. There are so many fun things happening in it, and I love the cooperative nature, and I have a pretty rich history in trick-taking, and so for me it just felt so comfortable yet still new and fresh. And so The Crew really resonated with me. And I love that there are different challenges, and so many different challenges. There are 50 in the book that you get. And like I said, we're moving on to 43. And it's so fun. So as I've played it many, many times, it's actually gone up a little, not by much. Right now I would rank The Crew at an 8.5. I think it's just a solid game, and it's so replayable. And for me, that brings it back to my table time and time again with my gaming group that I do The Crew with. I'm going to move on to The King's Dilemma. As you can tell, I was fully enamored with this game, and it just hit me right there in that sweet spot. It works on so many levels. So if you'd ask me at game 4 or 5, I would give this a 9. And since finishing the entire Legacy game series and going through everything, that number has dropped. I don't think I would want to play this again or really recommend it to a whole lot of people for a variety of reasons. And that means that my ranking for this has gone from a 9. I think at this point I would probably rank it a 7. And I'm going to just give a couple of reasons why this might be an isolated experience. 2 things. My team, the people I played with, we actually forgot to add one of the decks when they asked us to, and it was probably around game 3 or 4, and we didn't realize that we had missed an entire 2 strands of the 5 threads that give you story opportunities. It was game 13, maybe game 12, when we figured out that we'd made a mistake because we got to the end of the deck and there was nothing to draw and we knew we'd made a mistake. And to play a game and to kind of have it botched in such a big way really affected the swing of the families and their power and who won each game and who had advantages that were so strong in the very beginning that lasted the entire game. And so there was a mistake. We made a mistake and we all recognized it and kind of said, well, from here on we totally get it. We know we did it to ourselves. We just made a mistake. However, to make a mistake like that that's so long-lasting is kind of disappointing in such an expansive, story-driven game. The other thing that kind of made this a little frustrating was we didn't necessarily know how the game was going to end, when it was going to end, and how the game was going to be ranked or evaluated. And we were making lots of choices based on assumptions, and I think so many of us were disappointed with the outcome. And it's just that there was too much mystery and clouding of information, and it just left us all pretty sour. And so I think at the end of the game, and even during the games, it just got a little repetitive. We also felt like sometimes none of our choices mattered, and they should matter. And we were all basing our decisions off of our motives and allegiances and not really based on the story. I mean, we were condoning all sorts of heinous acts, and it just didn't feel right. And so for me, after going through the experience, that number definitely has gone down, which means that my long-term favorite has been the crew. Next, I would jump into cartographers, and then lastly, I would recommend and or play The King's Dilemma. This is all kind of surprising to me, and that's the reason I'm making this video. I really thought The King's Dilemma was just going to coast right on through. I knew the crew was solid, and I had a really high score for it, and I knew that cartographers didn't click with me, but it got better the more I played it. And so for The King's Dilemma to kind of, plummet two numbers in score with like a 9 to a 7 was really surprising to me, but that's really what I came up with after my personal experience. So let me know in the comments below what your experience has been after having played these games for several times, dozens of times. You've had months to kind of think about this, and you've had a little bit of time after the awards were given and the crew won, which I'm really happy about. I think that was a really great decision, and so kudos for the Kennerspiel des Jahres, and I will see you next time.